Seen.
Well, I see him. He's right there. There, he's muted. I'll unmute you. There you
There
are.
you go.
Okay.
Okay.
Guys.
Hi there.
Made it.
Made it. Thank you.
Oh, Lordy. It's been an interesting day, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry for the miscommunication. I thought when you got signed in or we put you in on, whoever put you in on our website for our speakers, that it would acknowledge you.
You are under the misunderstanding that I am a professional speaker.
Oh,
I
well.
don't know what the heck I'm doing. I am strictly an amateur. I hope you understand that.
Paul was a very good speaker.
My God, I was born back in 1868, so I don't know any of this stuff.
Well,
Okay.
you remember Cliff Dockerman's criteria for rotary speakers.
What's that?
Cliff was the international president when I was president of my own club.
Okay. It says
In
Don't have to be good, just
Just-
free.
1983.
yeah.
What's that, David?
Cliff Dockerman said rotary speakers don't have to be good, just free.
Just free.
We're going-
Okay. Record, Howard.
We're deviate from our normal. We would normally have an introduction and all that stuff. This is the E Club of North Texas, and Andy is a past director, and Anita, who says Andy Wood, is really not, but
I thought we.
She's a past president, and she's the aide to Holger Canuck's wife.
That's right. Okay. I think, Doug, it's my honor to introduce you. You're out of the Evening Club in Greeley, Colorado, and is a good friend of one of my governor classmates, Brian Cook. So, actually, I would like to introduce Paul Harris.
So you want to introduce me to that? Before you do that, can you give me a few guidelines? When do we start and when do we stop?
You can start now, and we have people that are going to have to leave at 6:30.
Okay.
Sorry that we have to leave, Doug, but we have our board meeting for our Rotary Club starting at 6:30, but we wanted to hear you. So.
Okay, well, I'll try to be as brief or as elongated as you wish. I have a dinner meeting. I tell you, this morning when I awakened, I can assure you I had no idea this was going to occur. So with that, a couple things I'd like to say before I get started then. One of the things is I got started in this whole thing when I joined Rotary, and one of the secretaries of my club, who was secretary for 29 years in a row, gave me the book, My Road to Rotary by Paul Harris, his autobiography. And that was my first introduction to Paul Harris. I had no idea who he was. Since then, I have gone to his home in Wallingford, Vermont. I've even had the opportunity to speak to the club in Wallingford, not about Paul Harris, simply about some other stuff that I sort of like and do. But anyway, I got involved with this back in 2011 when I decided to take it upon myself to introduce the rest of my club to Paul Harris. And so unbeknownst to any of them except for 2 or 3 friends, I did that on that occasion of the, I think it was the 106th anniversary specific date of the founding of Paul Harris. So with that, I'm going to get into character, if I may, and I want you to be like Lois Lane. Do any of you know who Lois Lane is?
Yes.
Some of you.
We're
Yes.
old enough.
She was a secretary that was involved in what happened when Clark Kent put on those glasses. Voila, she had no idea it was Superman. So I'm going to do that and pretend you have no idea that this is anybody except for Paul Harris. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the invitation this evening. Hope you're all having fun down all over the world, and especially down there in Houston. I presume, Linda, that it has quit freezing since the last time you and I met. But anyway, on this occasion, I really would like to give you some idea of Paul Harris. That is I. And I might as well start from the very beginning. So where do we start? Well, I was born 3 days and 4 years after, let's try that again, 4 days and 3 years after the assassination of President Lincoln. I was born during the presidency of Johnson. Now, of course, you all recognize that I'm not talking about Lyndon, but rather of Andrew. So with that in mind, keep that in mind that I am a little bit older, and if I forget things, why, it's probably I'll just attribute it to my age. Anyway, I don't remember anything, but I'd like for all of you to think about this. How many of you can go back and remember what was the first thing you ever remember in your life? Just think about that, but while you're doing that, I'll tell you mine. And that is, I was 3 years old at the time, and it was a dark night in the middle of summer, and I was on a train with my father and my older brother, Cecil, and we all arrived at this little town in Vermont. I found out later it was a little town called Wallingford, and it was there I was going to spend the next 15 years of my life. And it's probably one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me. And the reason I say that is because my parents, they didn't know the meaning of parsimony. They spent like it was going out of style. And in doing so, they didn't leave the rest of us very well off. And as a matter of fact, it was so bad that indeed, in this year, which was 1871, I was going with my brother, who was 5 at the time, I was 3, and we were going back to our grandparents' home in Vermont because they couldn't afford to keep us, my parents, that is. And so we arrived there in the middle of the night, and the first thing I remember is there was this older gentleman at the train station. There wasn't anybody else around as we got off, and he was much, much taller than I. But I remember him specifically because he had these huge hands, and they were perfect for a little boy's thumb to fit in right around, or a little boy's fist to fit right around that thumb. And he led me from there up the street and across the road, and about the third house on the far side of the street as we went north was the home of my grandparents. And that was also the first time I'd ever met them, and I remember this frail little lady, 89 pounds, never a pound less, never a pound more in her entire life, except maybe when she was pregnant with my dad and a few other of his siblings. But other than that, hi, Brian.
Hi, Andy. Hi, Doug.
Anyway, I remember that evening because specifically it was the first time I was ever introduced to berries and cream, and they were the most delicious thing I'd ever had in my life. Now, the next morning, we had a little bit of a problem because that morning, as my grandmother decided she wanted to lace up my shoes, I decided I was going to tell her who was in charge here, and it wasn't she. And when I told her that, I said, "You're not my mama, and I'm not going to hold still." At which point she expressed to me that she was going to see about that. And she went to get my father, and my father came into the room and told me in no uncertain terms that we would make a quick trip to the woodshed if I would not obey that lady for the rest of my life. And thus, so wise am I that I decided indeed to do so. That was the first lesson I learned. And actually over the forthcoming years, I learned a lot of lessons from her and from my grandmother. I learned something about education and how important it was. As a matter of fact, one of the things I do remember in my childhood is even after I was going to school, and even on those times when I'd come home and during the summers, Father would take me out to the barn, and he would sit there in his wheelbarrow, and I would sit on the swing, and he would give to me some information relative to how do you spell this word and that word, and he had it on his little vanilla folder in the back pocket, and he would read out and bring that out and read to me and ask me questions about the spellings. Well, I'll tell you how great he was, is that if it were not for him, I would never have gotten an education. I was not, to put it mildly, I was not a very good student. I would much rather play hooky go fishing, go swimming in the pool, the pond, rather. No pool, you kidding? Or go picking blackberries or wandering the hills and climbing the mountains around us. But I didn't do that all the time, didn't get a chance, and my grandfather was one of those who kind of urged me to read more books, got me a little interested in it. And he also sent me to some very nice schools. During my time through my early years, I had the opportunity to go to Black River Academy over in Ludlow and the Saxons River, where they had the Vermont Military Academy. I even ended up at the University of Vermont in Burlington. And the reason I mention those is in all three, the two, I didn't get flunked out of the military academy, but the other two, I got kicked out of school. Now, I'm not going to go into any description of why I did that, but that's what happened to me then. But I also, nevertheless, ended up for 1 year at Princeton. Some of you might even have heard of that college way back when. But somehow or other, I managed to accumulate enough information that they eventually allowed me to, or provided me with the monetary backing to allow me to go to the University of Iowa and go to law school there. Or actually, I was only there a year. I spent a year in training at the law offices of some relatives in Des Moines. So that was a part of my grandfather. My grandmother, however, played an equally important role. Several reasons. When I would go fishing, I would come home with these nice fish, and there was obviously too much for just our small family with my grandparents and me. And my grandmother would encourage me after she had cooked them to take them over to the twin sisters that lived across the road, or some of the other neighbors that maybe were not doing as well in the neighborhood. But I learned to share, and blueberries and blackberries that I'd pick in the mountains, same sort of results. Grandmother would encourage me to go there. The other thing that grandmother gave that was extremely important was Sunday school, church on Sunday. The Sabbath was indeed sacred. We were not allowed to play. We maintained our interest by very quietly staying around the home, unless my cousins who lived up in Rutland would come down, and their aunt lived right next door to us. And I would occasionally see them there, and all the cousins, we'd have fun there. So we had a good time, and I loved growing up there. Let's progress on, because I guess the thing you really want to know a little bit is this thing called Rotary. People say that I was childless. I did, in fact, marry after we had started Rotary back in 1910. I found a lovely woman with whom I married back in 1910, July 2nd. But prior to that, I developed a very important child by the name of Rotary. Now, that's an interesting sort of thing when I use that term, because guess what? You think we were called Rotary from the very beginning? No. Here's one for you. How about us being called the Windy City Roundup? Hey, fellow rounders today, how'd you like that? Think that would impress anybody? The others we thought about were the Chicago City Civic Club, the Booster Club, the Lake City Club, all different sort of things that ran by our minds. One of the ones that I liked best, and I don't know why the rest of them didn't take to it, was the Conspirators. They didn't like that at all. Some of the others, however, didn't pass too much muster either. We had one that we thought was really good, and that was the 3F Club. Fun, fellowship, and food. But they didn't we called it the 3F Club, but the other one we thought about was Free from Females. So I saw a woman there in the audience just momentarily, and indeed we didn't have any females in those days. But how did Rotary get started? Well, it was interesting. After I finished my law school, and I took 5 years off, and I went traveling around the world. It was something I wanted to do, and I paid my way the entire way around by my work and went to various places. We'll talk about that if we have time. But that's what I did for the first 5 years. And then in February of of 1896, I ended up in Chicago, Illinois. Now, some people say that Rotary started on the basis of a $20 IOU. I said that. And the reason I said that was I had a fellow that one day, as I was walking down the street, he had an office right near my own there on Dearborn Street, and he came out of his store and he says, "Hey," he says, "your name, it's Paul, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're a lawyer, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Any chance that you could possibly get me to have a client of mine to pay me the $20 he owes me?" I said, "I don't know, but I could try." And about 2-3 days later, I walked into his office. I gave him the $20, and this gentleman, whose name was Sylvester Sheely, and I became best of friends shortly thereafter. And Sylvester was the first person with whom I even discussed the idea of the formation of a club somewhere along the line. But it took a lot of time. That was clear back in the late 1890s that I had met him. But we, through the years, worked a little bit more on it. Several other things happened to me during that time. When I was in Chicago, I hung out my shingle, and what do you think happened here at Paul Harris, attorney at law? What do you think happened? Did I get rich? No. Didn't have a cent to my name, hardly. I did do some things in collecting debts off various people for that time, but it took a long while to build up my law practice. And while I was doing that, also really wasn't feeling too well. I was in a big city, didn't know many people. The guys that I did know didn't seem to be, they were too busy developing their own businesses, and so I really didn't have many friends. About 4 years into that, what I did was to take a trip back to my hometown of Wallingford, and I spent some time wandering around there, visiting some of my old haunts, some of the pools where I'd fish, and some of the mountains that I'd climbed. And I thought, boy, why can't life be a lot more like it is in Wallingford? I had tremendous friends there, good friends, and lots of them. We did a lot of fun things together, but nothing like that in Chicago. So just after I got back, I did have a friend of mine who was a lawyer who invited me. He had recently lost his wife, and his name was Bob Frank, and Bob invited me up to his home in Rogers Park, just north of the center of Chicago. And after dinner, he and I walked around his little neighborhood. And we went into a couple of the stores there, a drugstore, and we went in a cigar store and had even a cigar at one point. And but he knew all these fellows that were the owners of the different shop, and he introduced me to all of them. And I really felt good after that. I'm thinking, why can't I have that? Something like that. And so those things started ruminating in my mind for a few years, and finally, in February, on the 23rd of February in 1896, in 1905, I finally got people together. It was Sylvester and a friend of mine that I also knew was a mining engineer by the name of Gus. See, that's a problem with not doing this for a while. Gus Lohr, and then he had a friend of his by the name of Hiram Shoring. Now, each of us was from a relatively small town. Hiram was from Litchfield, Maine, and Gus was from Carlinsville, Illinois, and Sylvester and a bunch of brothers grew up in Clay City, Indiana. So we were all small town kids, and but we got together that night, and I told them about my idea, and they seemed to cotton to it a little bit, and decided that maybe there's something to that. I went home that evening feeling I'd made some inroads, and we had decided to get together a couple weeks later, which we did on March 9th, which was a Thursday, in case some of you want to know about Thursdays versus other days. And anyway, we met at my office at the Wolf Building there on Dearborn, and we discussed a little bit more of the things there, and we had a few more other people that came. A good friend of mine by the name of Harry Ruggles joined us, and there was Bill Jensen and a few others that had come to that one. And then we decided again to meet a third time 2 weeks later. It was at that third meeting that we really put forth a lot of effort into sort of far as what we were really about and what we were trying to do. Now, the main thing we were trying to do was really just develop associates so that we'd have people with whom to do business. And that was our main emphasis with this organization, is that we could interchange with our vocations and help one another in that regard. However, the other thing, and the thing I was trying to create, obviously from my childhood days, was an atmosphere of fellowship and, frankly, fun. And it was those three features that we really started to work on. That summer, we got up to about 30 people in membership that first 6 months. And in the meantime, during the summer, we ceased our meetings that we were having. And instead, we were doing some things. We were going across the lake over into Michigan to Paw and to Washack and places like that. A friend of mine, Tom Clyburg, had a place over there, and we were doing some things on his property, all sorts of crazy stuff. But it seemed to be working, and we got more and more people. By the end of about the first 12 months that we'd been in existence, we had about 90 members that we put on our membership rolls. So that's sort of the beginning of it. Now, the one question that I like to ask to get everybody's attention is, most of you think that I was the first president of Rotary, right? Wrong. When we first, that third meeting, we decided to elect the president, and I had suggested that we perhaps consider Sylvester as our president, and indeed we elected him. The reason for that was I thought I could do better by working in the background and trying to fill in the spaces I was trying to create, and so that's what we did. We went that first year with Sylvester's leadership, and the next year we had a fellow by the name of Al White. Al was our second president. He was a fellow that he sold portable organs and accordions and things like that, which he manufactured, and was our second president. The third year, however, they decided they needed a little bit more leadership, and they asked me to do that, and I signed off for that role. Now, the things that happened in that period of time, however, I'd grown a little bit more. Some of you might know about my dalliance with the female people that I had run into and met a young lady from Georgia and Florida during my times of my follies way back when, and then later on. But in that time, I even asked her to marry me, and obviously she said no. And that left me somewhat heartbroken, but certainly gave my attention more back toward Rotary. And it was during that time when I assumed the presidency that I developed a triple course of what I wanted to pursue. The first was to get involved with growing our club. We had a membership of, about 90 or 100 people at that time, and with Harry Ruggles' work, why, I think he personally sponsored something like 150 people into the Rotary Club. How many of you have ever done that? And so we grew in numbers. The other thing that I wanted to do, however, was something that about half the guys were lukewarm and the other didn't care. And that was to try and perhaps expand Rotary, just not within Chicago, but elsewhere. And I had talked to different friends of mine who were going to different places in the United States on business. And finally, one of my roommates at the time, Manny Munoz, he and I were rooming together down at the Del Grotto Hotel, and he was going out to San Francisco. How many of you remember about the S&H green stamps? Any of you are familiar with that? Sperry and Hutchinson green stamps, if you remember. But Manny worked with them and was doing some business out in San Francisco. And I talked to him a little bit about the possibility of finding some people out there that might be perhaps interested in this concept of Rotary. And lo and behold, fortunately, he ran into a fellow lawyer similar to myself, Homer Wood. And Homer got the idea. This was in 1908. And of course, it was just a couple years before that they had the big earthquake in San Francisco. And some of the people there were really looking for the type of project that might interest them. And I had one other thing that I was trying to develop, and Manny sort of talk to them about that too. The third thing I was talking about, and we were early in my presidency in 2000 or 1907 trying to develop that, and that was the idea of doing something beside having fun and the fellowship. For example, something like service. And the first thing we ever developed was my idea that I got together with the mayor and quite a few city council people and other members of churches and so forth, and proposed doing something along these lines as a group. And the one group, the thing that we came up with, it was interesting. What could you do downtown when you had to go to a public or to a comfort station? You did two things. The bar association, I'm not talking about the legal one, I'm talking about the one where you go in and have some adult beverage. And they were very happy to provide that for people who had to perhaps use the facilities, not for just the consumption of alcohol. And they would come in to do one and do the other as well. Similarly, the dressing, the apparel industry was similar. For women, for example, who would come down, they would have to go into a little shop and buy something which would then enable them to perform a similar function, bodily function that they needed to do. But with that in mind, we figured, why don't we do something such as a comfort station here in downtown Chicago? And indeed, about 6 months later, we got the things really moving in October of that year, and we finally got funding. It was $20,000, and what was interesting about that is that the city had some leftover funds from some other things that they had funded that they weren't using, and they provided that as the basis for our project. So not only did we get it done, but we didn't even have to pay for it. Something that the Rotary might keep in mind on future occasions from that time forward, which we have done, I believe. So that's where we got started in those three venues. And indeed, we shortly thereafter started our second club ever in San Francisco, the third one right across the bay, due to Homer and another fellow friend of his who was a traveler's insurance agent who lived in Oakland, and they formed the Tri-City Club there. And then we went down to Los Angeles with Homer's brother and formed a club down there. And then lo and behold, unbeknownst to me, there was one formed up in Seattle, which was the fourth club, and Los Angeles then was the fifth. And then we also went to the East Coast, and Fred Tweed, a member of our Chicago club, helped me he formed a club in New York City, and then up to Boston. And then we came back to the West Coast in Tacoma and places like that, and off we went. So that's sort of the background of how we got started with this. I really would like, since I don't have a whole lot of remarks prepared, to sort of answer some questions that all of you might have, and I wonder if we can do that for as long as we have here. Now, there's a young lady here by the name of Linda that might be able to help me along those lines. Linda, would you like to cut in here and either ask some questions or get some others to perhaps, if they have anything they want to at least talk about?
Well, when,
Ask a PDB if they want to talk. Never.
I have a quick question. We've got to leave, and I'm so sorry we have to leave. But Paul, how did y'all get the international, first international Rotary Club started? I know it was in Winnipeg, but
Now I'm seeing Andy. Is your name Andy?
I'm Anita. Well, mine's supposed to say Anita. I don't know why mine says Andy.
It says Andy.
Well, I'm Anita.
Anyway, Anita, thank you for the question, and yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. After we got about the first 14, 16 clubs, there was a gentleman who joined the Rotary Club, Chesley Perry, and he became the secretary of Rotary from about 1908, and then when we formed the National Association, 1910, and thereafter till about 1942 or 3 when he finally retired. But it was he who was probably the builder. I might have been the architect, but he was the actual builder of Rotary. And our first national meeting was in 1910 there in Chicago at the Palmer House. And thereafter, the next year, we went out to Portland and then up to Duluth. And my goodness, let's see, I think Buffalo was the next one. And then who knows? Oh, the next one I think was actually down in Houston. I didn't make those after about 2012. 1912. I sort of dropped out. I had some medical problems that needed attention. But anyway, the first 2 years I was the president of the Rotary International, what became the Rotary International. We got Winnipeg as our first foreign club. It was number 35. Started there in about 1911. And thereafter it grew, crossing even the seas to London and Liverpool and Dublin and so forth. But that's sort of how that got started. But obviously we had a lot of interest nationwide and even internationally. That was what I envisioned when I started thinking about this very shortly after I started with the Chicago Club. I'm thinking, this is a good project, good program for a lot of people. It met a lot of different needs, both in the vocations of people, but in the fellowship. And then when we got the service aspect of it, that put it all together and really took off. For example, in 1913, I don't know if you remember, you're probably a little young for that, but in 1913 we had a big flood in the Midwest. I remember it devastated like Indianapolis and Dayton, Ohio, and there was a Rotary Club in Dayton. It was the 47th Club, and when it hit there, it was that club that really got things moving with the help of, there's a computer company there that was very helpful in getting things going. But it really showed that we had a lot going for us and we could accomplish a whole lot more. So I really appreciate your interest in the Rotary and the international aspect of it.
Well, thank you again, and I am so sorry that we have to leave.
I understand.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you,
Thank
Linda,
you.
for the
Nice meeting you.
invitation.
You're welcome. Paul, tell us about your house and all the trees that were planted. Was that for
Calmly Bank.
Comley Bank? Is that
Oh, okay. Thank you for that question. That's a great question. You're talking about Comley Bank. It's located in the south side of Chicago in the Blue Island area down there. I was about 14 miles away from downtown. I will tell you a little side that's kind of cute. He said, when I bought that, I had met this lovely lady in 1910. I was on an outing, hiking, and I tore my jacket. And I guess you could say it was a Harris tweed, but it was some kind of jacket. But anyway, I tore that, and this beautiful young lady came up to me, and she says, "Why, Paul, I can fix that." And she took my jacket. I don't remember if she ever fixed it or not. But I do remember that 4 months later, I married her. 3.5 months later, I married her. And we got married on the 2nd of July back in 1910. And then I had always, when we used to walk in that area of Chicago, I always said to myself, if I ever got a chance, I would love to live in this region. It was, there was just a hill in that area, and on top of that hill, they had a house that had been built like 6 years before. And I finally, the guy was moving out, and I bought it from him. And then that's where Gene and I resided from 1912 until my departure from this world back in 1947. But it was a lovely home. Now you ask about the trees. We built a lot of trees around there, some of which we did so in honor of some of our dear friends that we had known internationally who had come to visit, and some others that we had gotten to know through the years from the United States. And then also what we did was to take that entire scenario and we would take that abroad. And I think the first one ever planted might have been in Norway. But various countries that we would visit, it seemed to be something was, a habit was catching on, and we did that throughout the world. Wherever we traveled, we would try to make a special attention to possibly planting a tree. And that's where the whole thing grew.
Paul, I have a question.
Yes.
When did you decide to call your home Cumley Banks, and why?
Okay, and that's an excellent question. I believe your name's Brian. I think you seem familiar somehow. But anyway, what happened there is that my wife, Jean, had come over at the age of about 10 years old from Edinburgh, Scotland. And when she came here, she still had never forgot her youth back in Scotland. And the place that she lived was an area called Cumley Bank. And when we had that, she just thought it would be the cat's meow to allow her to call it that, and that's what we did. And although it was, 80526 or something like that, South Longwood Drive, why we knew it affectionately as Cumley Bank.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. And thanks for asking about my lovely wife.
Was it Sylvester lived right behind you, or who was it?
Yes, he did. He lived, we would see one another pretty much on a daily basis. He would come over to our place, walk through a little wooded area there. He lived over, I think it was 101st Avenue there, right in back of us. And he and his lovely wife would come over, and we would have good times together. But he indeed was my dearest friend. Some of you who have lived a little bit longer or less long than I do know that, as a matter of fact, Sylvester and I share a nice, lovely plot, at least it has our little markers on it, back there in Blue Island Cemetery in that region where we live. Thanks for asking that.
Heard from the founder of Lions.
I'm sorry.
And Paul is buried only about 100 yards from the founder of the Lions Club.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that might have been after me. Not that I remember.
Right.
I might have been there at the time, but then again, I wasn't. And I really don't prefer to go back there too often.
Howard, do you have any questions or any comments?
When did you make it like a full-time job to be involved with Rotary, or was it always just volunteer work?
That's a good question, Howard. As a matter of fact, it took a great deal of my time, unfortunately. It just sort of evolved. I spent a great deal of time at it. As a matter of fact, after we started the club, it consumed a great deal of my priorities, and fortunately I was not married at the time. But as we evolved, and then especially when we got the National Association going, and with Chez's involvement, it really took a tremendous amount of work away from me. But I continued practicing through the teens and into the 20s of the 20th century. And then after I sort of retired, I really got to where I couldn't handle my practice, and I had 3 or 4 bouts of some serious problems medically with heart attacks. Some people probably considered that I'd had a nervous breakdown there probably. I just wore out right after the convention in 1912 there in Duluth. I took a lot of time off, and Jean, as a matter of fact, was the one that really nursed me back to health. And for various times throughout the rest of my life, I took a considerable amount of time off. But what really happened that got me back involved, when we had our 25th anniversary there in 1930 back in Chicago, I was invited to come back. And that was the first time I'd made an appearance since, I think, 1912 at any meeting. I would send them letters throughout the years, which Chez usually would be the one who would read them. But it was finally in 1930 that I got there, and then I had been doing some work for Rotary at the request of Chez, who felt that we needed a figurehead, and they figured I was as good as anyone, I guess, since I'd started it. And so he asked me to do some of those, and so I did take some time and was making some various trips down to the Bahamas and Cuba, down to Central South America. It was interesting, the number of awards from the governmental officials in a lot of these areas. They paid a great deal of attention to Rotary for what Rotary had done. There was a lot being done in World War I that Rotary did. The Victory Gardens and a lot of that were programs taken on by Rotarians in their various communities. Some of the fundraiser for the support were a lot of it came from Rotarians throughout the nation. But that was mainly how I got involved with the other programs at that time. Thank you for your question, Howard.
You could go on.
Okay. Paul, we know you could go on and on and on. I know you have a very important meeting to attend. You're very well known, and you're always on call, and we do appreciate this. And you take care, and many more.
Maybe we can get back together.
And maybe we can get
sometime.
back together some.
Well, thank you so very much. I do want to make one comment, if I may, and I want to point this out. You realize that I did leave this earth on January 27th of 1947. The reason that's kind of important for me in various aspects is that it was a memorable time for a lot of Rotarians. But what I took, and I passed along to some of the people who followed me, a friend of mine here in Greeley is very interested in this, and that is 2 days before I died, there was another famous person from Chicago who died. He died at the age of 48. Now, many of you who may, before you joined Rotary, not have heard of Paul Harris, I am sure are familiar with this person. His name happened to be Alfonso Capone. Any of you ever hear of him? Now, the reason that I bring that forth is Doug keeps bugging me, but he is really upset with the fact that more people know about Al Capone than know about Paul Harris. So if you ask Doug how he got started in all this, you can take it back to that sort of thing. But I'll leave you with that thought. I sincerely thank y'all for inviting me. If you want some other time, maybe we can get together and talk about some of the other aspects of Paul's life. I apologize for not being so prepared. I just walked in here today, and Doug told me that I was supposed to come here and do this. So that's when I heard about it. So I might not have been as prepared as usual. So I thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and looking forward to seeing you again sometime. Linda, David, it's nice seeing you both again.
Thank you.
Howard, nice seeing you. I saw you.
I was
one
going to
time.
say,
Good
for a
report.
guy that died in 1947, you're
Been
very
lovely
well
to meet you
preserved.
all. Thank you all. Brian, I
We'll
still
see-
think
we'll see you-
I remember you from somewhere.
We'll see you in a few minutes.
About 20 minutes.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank both of you for coming.
Yeah.
All the way from Colorado.
Yeah, and Brian, are you still here? I think Brian left. Okay.
He's here.
Oh, he's still here? Oh, okay. Brian, Are you-
I just got a request from Ray Klingensmith to send him what I had put together from my friend in India, every single Rotary International president on one page.
wow.
If you want that, I can send that to you also.
Please do.
Sure.
We'd love to have it.
Will do.
And I guess, are you going to be on June the 30th or 29th, or when are you coming in on the reunion?
29th is the,
You're the western part. We're a different time zone than I think yours.
right.
I think
Well, let's keep in touch.
Yeah.
Send us the info. David, good to see you. I hope you're taking plenty of pictures.
Okay. Thank you. Y'all have a great day. And thank you, Brian. I
Thanks
appreciate
for arranging this, Linda.
it. Okay. Bye-bye.
Send that to you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Okay.
Doug for us.
Okay. Okay, I think we will go on with the second part of our meeting. Howard, do you have anything to contribute?
Trying to think if there's anything. We're talking about the nomination. So far, you have two, and Lisa has one. So you're in the lead right now,
A commanding lead.
Yeah.
commanding lead. But that's all I've heard. I did send it out twice. Once
Well, we need it, pretty well. We need it by the end of the week. So you've sent it out, and we
if
have.
nobody else votes, then you win.
I win by default.
I had
Okay.
better vote for Linda.
And anyway, the other thing is, I've been asked to continue serving on the Peace Fellow Scholarship Subcommittee. I didn't know I was already on it, but Bill Dindy is the new district foundation chair, and so he's asked me this afternoon if I would continue on in that post. And so it won't be until November that we find out if our candidate received it. She was alternate last year, so she has a very good chance of getting it this year. But she's a professor last year at SMU. She's now a professor at TCU, and so she's very well qualified. She teaches anthropology.
Okay.
So she's a very interesting person. We had lunch with her and District Governor John Mosier, his wife, and Owen Devlin this last week. So other than that,
I have nothing else to add. I've been doing a lot of Rotary clubs in Florida. I went to Clewiston yesterday, which is an hour and a half north of Miami, and it was a long ride. It was like a 4.5 hour drive. Vicky didn't want to go, so I went by myself. And that's about it. Everything else is kind of status quo.
I went to Pets in Orlando.
yeah, when he was president-elect, he went to Pets in Orlando because he was working on the House of Friendship here.
Oh,
And-
okay.
Lone Star Pets. Charlotte, well, she had to leave, and she is going to be moving to Mobile. Still keep her business here.
Okay.
Bob
How's
is,
she gonna do that? She's gonna commute?
yeah, they go back and forth. Bob will have his practice in Mobile that he's working with someone there. And
Okay.
anyway, but anyway, that's all that's going on here, and appreciate it, and you can stop recording. And,
Let me.
the four-way test.
Oh, do the full weight test. Full weight test are the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, will it be fun? I just want to mention a lot of the clubs are doing the fifth. I'm not going to say all of them, but something like 75-80% of them are actually doing that.
What, have fun?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like he said, the first of the three F's: fun, fellowship, and food.
Okay, that
Fun
makes
was
sense.
the first thing. So
I thought fifth was, is it tax deductible?
Will be tax deductible, yeah. Okay, well, I'll see you in 2 weeks.
okay. Bye bye.
Stay well.